Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to hand it over to Professor Una Okonkwo Osili, who's here today. She's an expert. She's one of those who is she's actually Associate Dean of Research, International Programs at Indiana University, Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. She's actually calling from Indiana. She's joining us from Indianapolis today. Global expert on economic, financial development, philanthropy, and social innovation. And a lot of her research, her development, and she's an author, she's a speaker and advisor. So I'm going to have her moderate our session today. We're so lucky to have this team women today, team of great people. So we're so excited. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Catalyst, thank you, Wando, and thank you to our fantastic participants and speakers. Welcome. I'm so delighted and excited to have this conversation. It could not come at a better time. So welcome, and thank you for joining. So our topic today is about sustainable livelihoods. And if you've been paying any attention to the news in the last few years, you'll know that the world has been through unprecedented economic shocks, health shocks, and also an impending and actually current ongoing climate crisis. Just this week, we heard very, I'd say, worrisome, if not concerning statistics about growing rates of hunger and displacement in many parts of the world, with women and children bearing the brunt of these changes. And that's why today's panel is really the best set of conversations to have. We're going to kick off this discussion of sustainable livelihoods by discussing the perspectives of both Mary Olushoga and Nadia Kist, who are working on the front lines of this question of how do we bring economic change, how do we unlock the levers of finance, access to capital, but also well-being and health. So this whole nexus that we keep talking about. I am a proud daughter of the African continent. In case you haven't already seen that by my name, I am somebody who was drawn into this work because I really wanted to see our continent, Africa, at the table in actually leading the way in terms of economic progress and change. And when we think about the face of progress in Africa, you cannot have that conversation without centering on women. Women grow the bulk of the food on the continent, they control the commerce, and they make important decisions about their families, the health and well-being of their children. And so we're going to dive right into it, and I'm going to just share a few highlights from their bios. These are some impressive speakers that we have gathered, so please welcome them. And I'll just share a few highlights from their bios before we jump into the conversation. So let me start with Mary. Mary, somebody I've actually just recently met. You can't say that often these days with most of us interacting on Zoom, but I was fortunate to share the stage with her just last month. Mary is an innovator, a social entrepreneur, and someone who takes ideas and puts them into action. She doesn't just talk about it, she is about it. And just to share, she's an award-winning community and economic development professional. She is focused on using her expertise, her voice, her talents, her testimony to support African women and entrepreneurs. And just recently, in the last few years, she launched a new platform, and it's titled the African Women Power Network. It's a vendor program, and its mission is to increase the number of women vendors, female enterprises who can supply to retailers, large-scale retailers across the continent. She had this idea, she had a vision, and she went for it. She didn't wait for anyone else to approve this plan. And to date, she's been able to secure access to vendor relationships, supplier relationships with some of Nigeria's largest retailers. ShopRite is one of them. And she has also been able to use this network to amplify the success of these women. So welcome, Mary. I'm so pleased to have you. And we just celebrated Mary's work at an event last month called Black Women Give Back. She was one of the 4 honorees at that event. So welcome, Mary. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And let me also just quickly introduce Nadia before we go to the panel. So Nadia's expertise is also right on time. She is a leader in global health. She has over 2 decades of experience leading HIV-focused organizations in Africa. And she's also committed to centering communities, bringing communities to the forefront of this change. Currently, she serves as the Director of African Partnerships, leading regional operations and overseeing grant making for Bloodwater. And she works to strengthen Africa's community-driven organizations in Eastern and Southern Africa. She sits on many boards, including the African Philanthropy Forum, and also is the co-founder of Seeds of Hope, which is a youth-focused charitable trust which expands educational access through academic scholarships. So you can see that both of these women are leaders in their own right, but they've also brought a focus on women. They've brought a focus on community, and they've focused on how do we expand the access that individuals, families, and communities have to the levers of economic development. So that is just, I thought we had to start by sharing their bios just so you can understand the journey that they've been on. So we're going to come to you, Mary, first. And I just thought it might be helpful to give the context. I know your story because I've had the pleasure of hearing it and meeting you in person, but why did you decide to start this right now? And what are the opportunities that you are opening up to women on the continent, starting in Nigeria? So let's just hear a little bit about your journey.
Absolutely. And thank you very much, Dr. Ona, for that warm introduction. And I'm, very excited to be here to tell my story. I think I became very interested in supporting women, looking at my own personal journey and seeing how, my mom for a while was a, main provider for the family. And I began to think, what else can we do to ensure that, more women who may be like my mom can be supported? And so along the way, I went to college in New York, got my graduate school degree. I just kept coming back to the thought of what can I do to make a difference in the lives of African women? And I became very passionate at sort of like that thesis and that project. And so in 2012, I launched the AWP Network. AWP stands for African Women Power Network. And really when I started that, I just began interviewing a lot of my friends who had come to school here in the US and were going back to Nigeria and relocating, for one reason or the other. And, really trying to figure out how to support the women. So I began doing interviews. And then over the years, I started the AWP vendor program. And really the initiative for the AWP vendor program was to, connect women entrepreneurs and provide them with access to market opportunities. And so I was really focused on doing that. And, we were able to, sort of connect with large retailers. Like you said earlier, we have a partnership with ShopRite Nigeria, who is our founding partner. Prince Abano. We have a partnership with Next Cash and Carry. And really the goal is access to market. How can we resolve access to market challenges for African women entrepreneurs? And it's been a personal journey to a communal journey now. It's really about the community of African women and really supporting African women entrepreneurs.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing your story and also bringing that whole context to light. We're going to come to you, Nadia, and I am so excited to meet you virtually, and I'm sure we're going to get to meet in person very soon. This is such a critical time to have this conversation. You are working with communities, you're providing grants, you're providing access to finance, but with a focus on health. And then you also have your other hat that you wear with the Seeds for Hope and Education. So you're bringing both of these levers for economic success and progress to the communities you serve. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this work, what motivates you, and a bit about Bloodwater and what it does in the communities that you serve.
Well, thank you, Dr. Una. It's such an honor to be here, to the entire Catalyst 2030 team. The journey here is a long one. I really wouldn't even know how to distill it down except to say that I'm also a daughter of the continent. And it was just an inescapable passion to respond particularly to the HIV epidemic, a journey that for me started about 20 years ago, slightly over 20 years ago, when I was a college student also in New York like Mary. And it catalyzed in me a desire to respond, but to do so in a way that actually would amplify and elevate the communities themselves to own and drive the solutions that were most relevant. So I had worked for a number of years before joining Bloodwater in the context of mostly very heavily restricted health programming. And in that journey, seeing that while it is absolutely critical that large scale funding mechanisms exist to resource the health sector, it also simultaneously is locking out communities from the equation. And communities are the gatekeeper for sustainable development. They are the gatekeeper for access to ensure that people have access to the services that are most critical. And we were ultimately working in this cycle that we were not able to interrupt for a more effective way to sustain health gains in the region. And so I joined Bloodwater at a time when the organization was revisiting its grant-making model, looking to how to better equip and resource communities to own and drive their sustainable development goals. And so a little bit about Bloodwater, and then also kind of connecting back to this, the importance of really empowering and giving communities the resources and the autonomy to decide how that should be applied. Bloodwater is a grant-making organization that was founded by the Grammy Award-winning band Jars of Play, if anyone out there knows them. It's a private philanthropic organization that partners exclusively with African-led and community-driven organizations that are working to end HIV and water-related health disparities in Eastern and Southern Africa. So health is the entry point, but it is not the end. So we really work with community-based organizations so that we are able to resource integrated, holistic development solutions for the issues that they are navigating in the communities that they serve and that they operate within. Our mission is achieved through a model of partnership that pairs very flexible private philanthropy through grants programming with a paired institutional strengthening arm of investment that is in real time over an 8-year relationship, investing in the leaders, in their systems, the organizations holistically, so that we are able to support their health, their longevity, and their ability to live into the fullness of their mission for the long term. Our model is designed for relational depth, so we work on a small scale with these organizations to go really deep over an 8-year relationship. And it's really rooted around the belief that communities are the experts and the rightful custodians of their development. Communities know the solutions that are the most relevant, they know what is needed, and they know how to serve the wholeness of people for the long term. We also stand from the belief that communities are already resourced in diverse ways, that they're not coming to the table of this partnership from a deficit, that they are also bringing a wealth of financial and human and intellectual and other kinds of assets, so that our partnership is in effect really just leveraging the wealth of existing community resources and assets to have greater impact in the long term. It's something that I'm really passionate about. Also connecting back to what you were saying about Seeds for Hope, we really need to change the way in which partnership looks when we are working in communities on the continent. It really is about coming in as peers, living out models that are equitable, that give communities and individuals the agency to decide what needs to happen at what pace and what are the resource allocations to make that possible. Also considering that this work can never happen in a silo, that we are a part of a greater network of peers and collaborators. And one of the things that I'm most excited about Catalyst is just the desire to increase commitments from like-minded organizations that care about seeing Africa own and drive its development processes as a whole, that we would make commitments to resource this, to put rubber meets the road into action and not just talk about it at a policy level. And so that's one of the things that's really important about the way that we do our work, not just with our partners who are the ones on the front lines working in communities, but also resourcing them as leaders to have greater agency and influence. And one of the things that I'm most passionate about in doing that is an initiative that we've launched within Bloodwater called the Leader Collective, which is a community of practice that exists to convene and to amplify African leaders driving social change on the continent. Right now, it exists primarily to support our community of partners, those leaders, but it's something that we're going to make available to like-minded organizations across the continent. And the goal, if the platform is leveraged fully and well, is to influence the practice of philanthropy and to showcase homegrown development solutions, so that when we talk about sustainable development, we're talking about initiatives that are designed and that are developed and resourced from the communities. And only through partnerships like ours are we able to amplify impact, but it's all homegrown development initiatives that are driving impact in ways that many don't know about, because they just don't have the kind of spotlight shining what's happening in the communities that they're working in.
Wow, Nadia, you've given us so much to chew on, reflect on, and act on. So I just want to lift up some points from what you've said. The first one that resonates so clearly, I'm sure, with our audience is putting communities at the center of the work, understanding that communities have ideas, they have resources, they have human capital, financial capital, and they are partners in the development process. In fact, often you cannot solve problems without engaging community. And I think that's what Catalyst also has at the forefront of its mission. The other point that I also wanted to lift up that you highlighted was the role that leaders play in this process, and how African leaders, especially our next generation of leaders, all of you joining us today, are the ones that are going to drive the process. It's not going to come from anybody else. It's going to come from us. We are the change that we've been waiting for, as President Obama, another son of the continent, has said. So I will try to circle back and bring both Mary's perspective and Nadia's to the forefront. One of the issues when we think about sustainable livelihoods is the ability to recover from shocks. We've all been through collectively as a world some very significant setbacks, but we're also resilient. We're also at a place where we're starting to think about how do we build back our communities, but also in a way that's resilient. And when we focus on sustainable livelihoods, the idea is really that households have the resources to recover from economic shocks. And you are working primarily with women and children. We've also seen during this crisis that women have borne a disproportionate share of the financial and economic insecurity. So Mary, you've worked with families directly. How is the work you're doing changing women's lives? And how do you see it connected to SDGs across the board? Because this conversation is also around how do we end poverty? How do we bring more equity to our world? And so you're working with women and children. We're discussing sustainable livelihoods. What are the changes you're starting to see? I know it's still you're still starting out, but maybe even share some stories about the women that have been impacted by the vendor program and opening up those doors of opportunity for them.
No, absolutely. I think that, a lot of women that I get to work with, or even honored and blessed to work with, they usually start off as survival entrepreneurs, right? You have people who have to meet a need. They have to pay school fees. They have to buy a car. There's a lot of women in our program, their partners, their husbands are not working. And so them starting a business becomes something that must be done as a way to supplement and support the family. But I think after going through the AWP vendor program, right, we've created the curriculum in a way that women are thinking more strategically about their businesses. We invite CAC so that they can become corporations. We invite NAFDAC because ShopRite will not put you on the shelves if you're a food business if you don't have your certifications. We invite different people who can help with HACCP certifications and all of that. So getting them to think more strategically about their business is, excuse me, is really a game changer. Because if you're thinking about access to market opportunities, you really have to have your business structured in a particular way, making sure that your factory is clean and it's certified, for all types of certifications. And so once they go through that training program, I mean, I have women who started off, oh, it's a small mom and pop shop, when they're describing their businesses and the applications, because we do a call for application, and who have received millions of naira in contracts from ShopRite or from Prince Ebana. So it's really, really a game changer. But I think, we have to get more women thinking more strategically about their business and moving from survival entrepreneurship to innovative entrepreneurship. Because I think that gap is a major gap, whereby people, I was saying this yesterday at a Onga event that I spoke at, and I said, people often talk about, Nigeria, for example, has the largest number of women entrepreneurs, and women are entrepreneurs and all, but a lot of these businesses are micro businesses. A lot of these women entrepreneurs are solopreneurs. It's like one person trying to do everything, right? You're the marketer, you're the finance person, you're fulfilling the customer service, orders and all of that. But to grow your business strategically, it has to be bigger than you. It has to be more than you. And I think that's something that they really get from the AWP vendor program. Getting them to think more strategically so that they can grow their businesses. And when they're able to grow their businesses, and I think you may have mentioned this when we met, they can build even legacy type businesses, whereby they leave something more tangible for their families versus, for example, if something happened to them, then the business dies. So thinking strategically about their businesses certainly makes a difference, and helping more women go from survival entrepreneurs to innovative entrepreneurs is also a game changer. And we do that by creating access to market opportunities.
I love that. Moving from survival to innovation. We've all heard this. I think everybody knows this now, that when you invest in a woman, you don't just change the life of that woman, you change the life of her family. And when that business that woman owns succeeds, that also changes the trajectory for her community, for all the people she's connected with. And what I love about Mary's approach, I just have to lift this up as well, is that it's really focused on unlocking market opportunities, but also providing women, these female entrepreneurs, access to all kinds of opportunities beyond just their vendor relationships, so that they can think on a bigger scale. And so this is where, when we start thinking about sustainable livelihoods, it's really about changing the trajectory of a family, of an individual, from that survival to the resilience, to the innovator, to the leader, to the game-changing opportunity. So this is exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, even like when they get orders, right? They get an order from like a ShopRite or a founding partner, and they have to go look for financing. So we have banking partners that we work with, or they get an order and they begin to think about how they can hire. Oh, I need more staff. Mary, where can I find more people to hire? And so it's like this sort of spiral effect that really, like you rightly said, affects communities in a very positive way.
So this is a virtuous cycle. And so this is also what we want to stress as we think about SDGs, sustainable livelihoods, and ultimately moving our continent forward. So we're going to come back to you, Nadia, and let's drill into this. As you can see, I'm so excited about the work you're doing. I want you to bring to life how communities are changed by these relationships, and maybe give us an example of the work that Bloodwater is doing, how that's actually working on the ground, and what all of us can take away. Because what I also sense from this conversation is an optimism and excitement about other kinds of models that we can put forward, just as Mary has shared, other than the traditional way that perhaps we've worked in the past.
Yeah, thank you. What has come to mind just from even the way that Mary is discussing the work that she's doing with women on an individual level is the element about how people and the work that they do is multidimensional. And it's really important to approach the individuals or the communities that we serve from that same posture. And that really shapes the way that Bloodwater approaches its grant-making model and its partnership work with organizations, and then cascading through that down to the communities that they serve. It's really important to consider just the wholeness of institutions and the fact that community-based organizations are living entities that are in real time moving towards different aspects of institutional health. Maybe there could be some external variable that affects that the most accessible to us just based on the recent past, COVID, the war in the Ukraine, just all these dynamics that are happening on the peripheral of, even if it's a continent away from where we are living and working, there is a ripple effect. We are deeply interconnected. And so working with organizations that are seeking to serve the wholeness of people across various development issues and seeking to improve livelihoods at a community level means offering a partnership approach that is nimble, that is flexible, that has a long-term commitment from the onset so that you can walk the journey together, taking into account that organizational health and institutional change is a slow process. I am extremely hopeful, as you said. I think that there is a large narrative shift that is ongoing. I think that the last 2 years have had a catalytic effect to it, although it is not necessarily new. One of the things that I really champion, just being a part of the global AIDS response for the length of my career, is that the HIV response has taught us from decades earlier that communities are the most effective change agents for driving impacts in health outcomes. They were the ones that mobilized and catalyzed the AIDS response to have the kind of effect that it has right now if we go back to the 1980s. So even just learning from that one sector's experience and applying that till today, this current narrative of the power, the agency, the capability, and the resources that exist in communities, it's not new. It's just that there's a spotlight now that we can harness and try to take to a larger scale. And what we're seeing with the organizations that we partner with is that by offering a diverse range of institutional investments, looking at individuals and leaders, systems, policies, practices, like looking at the different dimensions of the whole, that we are able to see improvements in overall organizational health gains by 20% over a 4-year period. We haven't even reached a full 8 years for many of our organizations in our current model that we're working with, but really just there is a power that exists when you give an organization the autonomy to decide what are their priorities, what are the health investments that need to be made so that they can be more effective in driving sustainable development and seeing livelihood outcomes improved in the communities that they serve. There's something that really unlocks when you give individuals and institutions the power to choose and to decide truly. And I think that's one of the things that's really important about when you are working in an organization that has a flexible funding model, that you can partner without restrictions. You are returning power back into the hands of individuals and their communities to basically chart the path for what sustainable development will look like for them at a micro level, at a household level, and then kind of rippling up to the community as a whole. I hope I've answered that question.
Well, I've been listening intently. I just want to lift up some points. So you are actually calling, I'm just going to push just a little bit for a new type of development model, one that is truly inclusive, that centers on communities, but includes flexible funding, where you allow your grantees to inform the process, where you allow them to be part of the decision-making, and where ultimately you're shifting the power dynamic. I think you're calling for hashtag shift the power. And because we have so many young people that have joined us as part of the Catalyst team, there may also be some people that are working with funders. I just want to say it's time to also educate the funding community that success really looks very different in this post-COVID world, or if we're truly post-COVID, where we do have to rethink how we've worked in the past and bring more of this. We all saw the news with Mackenzie Scott with her very large gifts. all of the gifts were made actually with no restrictions. The idea was the leaders themselves knew how best to use those resources. The idea here is really deep listening and sharing power with your grantees. So that's really at the heart of what the work that you're doing. Now I'm going to ask all of you, everybody on the call today, to send in your questions, your ideas, maybe your thoughts for our panelists. There's so much to unpack here, but I'm going to circle back to both of you. We've been looking at your work. We've been thinking about how this could look. Maybe share what you have learned in terms of what sustainability looks like for all of our participants on the call today. What are some, looking ahead, we're now in 2022, we've just been through this crisis, but we're also planning ahead. 2023 is right around the corner. As we look into the future, where do you see the most opportunities? When we think about capital, we often talk about grants, but there are also investment tools that are being used. Impact investing is growing. What are some new trends in this sustainability livelihood network that you're very excited about? You can also use an example from your own work. Mary, you talked about innovation and driving innovation. So what are those opportunities that we need to pay attention to right now? For me, when I think about that, I always say start with women, because on the continent especially, we have more than 50% of the food being grown by women. When we think about market opportunities, women own a lot of the small businesses. And when we think about economic development, health and education, women are making those decisions. But are there other areas that we need to really pay attention to, especially if those have been neglected in the past? What are some new areas that need to really be lifted up on the call today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Ona, for your contribution. So I would say two areas that I'm most passionate about. The first is I hope to see, so it's 2030. I hope to see a world where women have enormous, especially African women, have enormous access to financing. I said this on the panel I spoke at yesterday, and I said, we live in a world where someone like Adam from WeWork can fail and it's okay and come back and raise more money. And then when it comes to, African women, someone's like, where's your cash flow, profit and loss statement, balance sheet, where is this? So there's so much policing on the rules and regulations on sort of African women's expertise, right? Let them fail, it's okay, So I think access to financing in a way that there are no limitations and that there is more opportunity for more African women entrepreneurs to explore what their possibilities are. I think for me, that's a huge part. And the other part too is aggressive exporting. So I'm a huge fan of, yes, we're going to create market access to market opportunities within the continent because we're not even there yet, right? Helping more women formalize their businesses so that they can be on the shelves on those large retail stores. But then how can they also get to Kenya and Ghana and all these other different places? And so we have the AFCTA, also helping out with that. But even more aggressively exporting so that, in places like Nigeria, one of my vendors actually spoke on the panel with me. And she said, when she thinks about the price of diesel, it's like, it's into her profit. So you're talking about clean energy, access to electricity and power, and all of that affects, it's sort of like a cycle, right? And she says by the time she buys diesel at 700 naira per liter, it's already eaten into her profit. So by the time she takes her product to a large retail store, she really has to sell like millions before she can even recoup that profit. So living in a space where there's access to electricity, clean energy, making sure that women are able to access market opportunities that they typically would not have access to. So aggressive export facilities, and then financing. I think financing is a huge aspect of it. And I say that because I would want to see more African women financed in a way that people are not policing them, in such a very aggressive manner. And I think those three things are very important to me.
Wow, there's just so much there. I think you've just captured the moment we're in. When we look across the world, we see a lot of entrepreneurs where, as you said, they're allowed to have ventures that don't quite make it. WeWork is a very good example, and they still raise capital. When it comes to African women, perhaps the standards are not equitable, and
Yes.
actually they have they have to work twice as hard to get half as
Yes.
much. Exactly.
Yes.
And we
And
need to change that. We need to change that. I think one other point that you've made that is also very critical is that today we also have the opportunity to work on innovation on a much bigger scale. The world is truly our oyster. When we think about access to markets, technology has made it possible to be in Lagos, to be in Kampala, to be in Nairobi, Johannesburg, and to serve markets around the world. One place that we've seen this really take place is in the entertainment industry. You put on Netflix, you can watch a Nigerian movie, a South African movie. Why not for African entrepreneurs and their goods? And with our music industry, we've also been able to actually reach global markets. So there's a lot of inspiration in those stories because it shows us that it's possible. And we're also seeing women at the forefront of some of those changes. Mo Abudu being one example of a Nigerian woman who has made it possible to reach those global markets. So I hear you loud and clear, and I think we are getting some questions from our audience. Let me just ask.
And I also,
yeah, go ahead.
I also want to emphasize access to communities and networks. I think we've been talking about this all day. It's very possible to reach some of those levels if you have access to communities and network. Like, getting the award from Indianapolis definitely helped me. I connected with you, and you created this opportunity for me to be speaking here today.
Yay!
Women leveraging on their networks and their connections, I think, really helps break through some of these barriers.
I love that point. So as well as connecting today with these amazing speakers, let's also form a community today where we support each other's dreams. You've heard we need to dream big. Africa, this is our moment, but we also need to support each other. To be a global entrepreneur, you need access to capital, but you also need networks. You need people who will open those doors of opportunity. So let's build that network today. Nadia, coming to you as you dream big today. 2030 is around the corner. It's not that far away. We're starting to see companies make plans, large-scale NGOs start to plan ahead. What would you like to see around sustainable livelihoods as you look in 10, 20 years from now? What would you like to see differently done? And what can we do now to prepare for that future?
Yeah, not to sound like a broken record, and sorry, my connection seems to be a bit unstable, so I hope I don't get more choppy. Just to connect to what Mary is saying about a lot of private sector, small and medium-sized businesses, looking at the public sector, not from government, but private philanthropy, the non-for-profit world, I believe the future of development is community-focused philanthropy, community-focused development, full stop. That is the space where there is a high degree of intersectionality around equity, around resourcing truly sustainable and effective development solutions, whether it's livelihoods, if it cuts across health, water access, you name it. What is coming out of communities to end the issues that they are navigating directly is the only pathway to sustainable development. And then also just to highlight, I do sit on the board of the East Africa Philanthropy Network. And one of the things that we are championing and that I would like to see not just exist, because I hope we do it before 2030, but that it is largely endorsed by the sector, is a code of conduct that speaks to what is truly equitable partnerships in the development sector. Really spelling out the norms, the practices, the behaviors, the terms that live out what equity truly is in the context of development partnerships, so that the norm changes and we're no longer accommodating the terms and conditions of relationships that disadvantage what communities actually want to see happen for their families and for their future. That for me is the 2030 goal. That's where I see the direction we're moving. It's here and now, but by then it should be the standard of practice, I believe.
Fantastic. So Nadia is I love a bold thinker. I have to just call you that, a bold thinker who is saying we don't have to wait for 2030. Let's start this now. Let's have a approach to development that does focus on communities. And let's also change the way we've actually worked with funders in the past. I do believe that governments alone can't solve all those problems. And I think you definitely share that we need to think about how do we empower our communities, our private philanthropists on the continent, and these homegrown solutions. We can't wait for the World Bank, the IMF, and anybody else to sanction or endorse our plans. We need to move forward. And that's what our conversation today is about. We have lots of questions coming in, and I think there are probably more people that would like to jump into this conversation. We're going to take at least a couple of those questions. And one of them says, can you share some wins on how you get customers, teams, people, communities invested in sustainability? So sustainability is sometimes about looking beyond just today. It's looking down the road, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And you may have to have some trade-offs where you do have to plan for the future in order to have a sustainable livelihood. What are some examples? Mary, you've shared some examples, but Nadia, maybe the two of you can tag team here and just tell us some stories about how we get those sustainability mindsets, because it is a mindset, but also any examples of wins. Nadia, it looks like you want to jump right in, so feel free to,
I really value the power of networks like this one. There is something very powerful about collective action in terms of just changing, moving us from discussion and what we may feel are like isolated opinions into a collective movement that ultimately will change, as I said, the norms, even policies, what is acceptable and not acceptable in our sector as a standard of practice. I have seen that through my work with the East Africa Philanthropy Network. I've seen it the more and more that I engage in spaces like these, where it's actually we see that we are not working in isolation, trying to push and change the narrative around African-led development and African leadership. And so there's something powerful about coming together. To me, the greatest win is where we see leaders kind of stepping into different spaces, different conversations, and actually speaking up to say that these terms are no longer workable for our communities. If it's within the context of a funding relationship, if it's in the context of even policies that are being formed, the power of no, so that there can be a contribution of what the right yes would be, I think is something that I'm seeing more and more. One of the areas that I feel has been a great challenge, but it's steadily shifting, is I think we've gravely underestimated the impact of just decades of very old development paradigms, what they've done to kind of shape the expectations of grassroots organizations when they're entering into development partnerships, and even just, you know, the slower process that it could take in some areas to actually return the voice, return the decision-making authority back into the hands of organizations. I think an area that I would say would be a greater win than the ones that we're seeing in the coming together of networks is that we are advocating loudly and consistently so that that kind of behavior change can happen, and organizations working in communities, African-led institutions are speaking as the standard from a place of power and not negotiation. I think that will just have a powerful impact to the future of what development looks like when we say African-led, resources from within the continent, from the communities trickling up, not just external trickling down.
Fantastic. So Nadia, one point I just want to stress is it's okay to say no to an arrangement or partnership that doesn't move your community forward. And that no, we have the power to say yes to opportunities that work for our communities and no to the opportunities that do not work for our communities. I'm going to try to come to a few more questions, but one is specifically for Mary. How do we shift the mindset? One participant just sent in a question where sometimes entrepreneurs are trying to meet today's needs, but how do we get that sort of also paradigm shift where you can start to invest in your future and realizing that you do need to do both, their short-term needs and also longer-term needs. So that's Sustainable Livelihoods theme coming back. The participant wanted to know, what are the barriers that you've encountered in discussing the sustainability framework that they can take to their communities, their organizations? What advice do you have for people who are working with entrepreneurs and trying to get them to invest in sustainability in their work?
No, that's a really good question. I think, Nadia said this earlier, really to treat the people that you're working with as peers and as subject experts. That way, deep listening can happen. You can really listen, do a needs assessment, and then figure out a strategy moving forward from there. And I think oftentimes when people think about this work, sustainability development work, there's this level of there has to be perfection, maybe because you're getting funders, money from funders and different things like that. But then it's okay if things don't work out. It's okay to fail. And I think that's very crucial and important. And when we're having conversations with entrepreneurs, especially when I tell them, look, it's okay to pivot. If something's not working, figure out what works. And so I would say, and also I think passion too makes a huge difference. It keeps people going. In terms of if there's an organization here that's doing work with entrepreneurs, is the first thing I would say is to treat them, the people that you're working with, as peers. Definitely listening to what their needs are, creating a needs assessment, and definitely a strategy, and definitely be very passionate about what the work that you do. I mean, I started as I said yesterday, I started the AWP vendor program in the middle of COVID. It was supposed to be an in-person event. Everything had been sponsored and paid for by ShopRite, and then COVID happened, right? I couldn't travel, and we still had to move forward with this program. And so thank God for technology. We were all on Zoom. It was a bit difficult because data is very expensive in Nigeria, but we still had the women show up. But I was up every day at 3 a.m. because of the time difference, and making sure that we conducted the training program and everything like that. And so I think that being passionate about the work that you do, and definitely I think training to helps. I think that creating sort of a training program for the people that you work with, ensuring that you're all on the same page, creating that framework, the curriculum definitely makes a difference. So I would say those four things definitely.
There, Mary, you are an inspiration. She did not let COVID stop her work. She did not let lack of data stop her work. She continued. And one point she's stressed that I want to underscore is that working with communities and partners, you really have to adopt a peer-to-peer approach. Absolutely. The entrepreneurs have a lot to teach you. You have a lot to learn from them. And I think certainly when working with entrepreneurs, you cannot help but admire their own resilience and be inspired by their own work. So how do you shift that narrative, that mindset? It's really bringing people alongside, listening to them, deep listening, understanding what their priorities are. I know we have to start wrapping up. One question that came in from the audience was, need to understand what we mean by sustainable livelihoods. I thought, let's actually stop and just quickly mention what that is. This is a new approach in the development world. It's a paradigm shift where we help change, or we're working to change the lives of people experiencing poverty and disadvantage. But it's a participatory approach that recognizes that all people have abilities, they have assets, and that those assets can be harnessed to help them improve their lives. In the Sustainable Livelihoods discussion, there's also an understanding that helping lift people out of poverty in line with the SDGs is not just lift them out of poverty for today, but really with a view to putting them on a different trajectory, improving their outcomes, their health, their well-being, and their community lives as well. So think of this as the SDG approach to to helping mitigate and alleviate poverty, but also building resilience as we do that in a way that is really centered on people and communities. So that's what sustainable livelihoods are. And it is a paradigm shift. This is not necessarily, as someone who has been in economic development for a long time, this is not how we thought about it back in the day, 10, 20 years ago. There are so many questions coming in, and I just think maybe we have time for one more before we turn it back over to the moderators. There's so much excitement about the discussion today, and I just want to share one more question that came up that was quite interesting, and it was about one of the participants was involved in fair trade, where his organization actually helped young women reach markets all over the world. They sold handmade products to shops around the world, and these opportunities created new pathways for these women and their children. The question is really, why aren't we seeing more of those when clearly there is a pathway to success? What are the barriers to building those types of networks? And what do you think, in your experience, we could all do? Because we know that there's so much creativity and talent throughout the continent, but yet that talent is not reaching those global opportunities. So what's stopping that? And maybe you can provide a call to action for all of us as you answer that question. What can we do differently to make sure that 2030, next year, this year is different? So Nadia, let's start with you, and then we'll go back to Mary.
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is layered. And I don't want to come at this from too systemic a lens, but I do think that there are some deeply rooted systemic issues that need to be addressed. That it is not the lack of viable products or services or, the markets are unlimited here. But there is a systemic barrier that prevents that from being accessed or being made available on a larger scale. And I think that's where this conversation around equity and changing the narrative is really important. It's not the one and all solution, but it is an important one to actually start creating the platforms and the spaces that amplify and elevate what is coming out from the different markets on the continent. Even just, my lens is philanthropy and development, less about the markets themselves, but to say that one of the things that we are seeing when we are paying attention, when we are actually documenting and bringing data to the table to undo this narrative of the deficit or the lack of capacity or quality on the continent, is that when communities are given the space, when African leaders are given the reins to drive development processes through our partnership, from year 1 to year 7, we're seeing 25% increase of resources that are being brought to the table from the communities. So it is not that these resources don't exist. It is about our commitment to document, to bring that forward so that the narrative actually is changed with evidence. It's not anecdotal. It's not kind of stepping into a movement and just harnessing, hashtags, and those are important, but actually demonstrating and evidencing it so that we can basically change the system from the bottom up. There's a dismantling that needs to happen. It's going to be certainly slower, but it needs to happen. And that's one of the facets that we can address it by, is changing this narrative with evidence so that there can be action to back it up.
Fantastic. I think we have to turn it back to our moderator, but I just want to summarize by saying thank you to both of you for such amazing experiences that you've shared, wisdom you've shared, and also call to actions that you've shared. Nadia saying to really unlock those opportunities, we have to fix the systems. We know the talent is there. Talent is in abundance. We know those ideas and creativity exist, and just need to be harnessed. So we need to fix the system so that we can truly unlock those doors of opportunity. And we need to fix the policies that hold African entrepreneurs and livelihoods back. So let me turn it back over to our moderator. I know we just have a minute left. And thank you again to our fantastic panel.
Thank you so much. Just to highlight, you guys have hit the nails. You've been on track with collaboration, but Africa Forward, why we're all here today, is really about that shift. And Nadia and Mary and Una have been speaking about. And the pillars that we are working on with social entrepreneurs is that narrative shift, ecosystem development funding, job creation, career counseling, and training. And we want to collaborate with all of you in the future and now to work towards this, because we believe that everything that's shared today was really important and valid. So I wanted to thank you again for joining us, for sharing, for really, really lifting all the spirits up and being a part of this Africa Forward. Thank you so much. And we'll be speaking soon.